welcome to Middleware Friday, episode 67, October 12, 2018. Greetings from the desert. So in this episode, I like to talk a little bit about one of the recent featured events that have taken place, like Ignite and Technorama. And I'll be talking together with Kent from the desert, basically about these events and what's being announced and some of the other experiences in general. Before that, I'll just want to notion that I'm currently in the US while I'm recording this. I've run the Chicago Marathon in 2018, so that's the reason I visited the US. So first I went to Chicago and did a race, my fifth marathon, the fourth of the majors. And I was able to finish it in a personal best of 4 hours and 9 minutes. So here are just some screenshot and impression of during and after the race. So you'll now watch the recording we did from Phoenix. I kind of mentioned it. Hello from Phoenix. Hi, welcome from the desert. So I'm here visiting Kent in Phoenix. So this is my first time here. He's always been adamant about me coming over. So after I running the Chicago Marathon, I decided to get a little bit longer in the US and flew out here to Phoenix.
So your run, how'd it go?
Yeah, it went pretty well. I did a personal best.
Yeah, I hear that. That's pretty awesome.
4 hours and 9 minutes, so it was pretty awesome. A little bit of drizzle, a little rain. First 21K went fine, then got a bit harder, but I definitely managed to do a good race.
Sweet, Congrats, that's awesome.
Thank you. So the reason we're doing this recording is that there has been some recent events, one being Ignite, and well, you were obviously there at Ignite. I didn't because I had to prepare for the marathon, but tell me some of the stuff that we discussed there. So one of the things like the Integration Services Environment.
So there's a couple things. So I think from a flow perspective, I'll selfishly start there.
No worries.
So we announced a couple things. One was Power Query support for the SQL connector, which is pretty cool. It gives you the ability to mash up different queries, essentially, and filters using a Power Query environment. So if you're familiar with Power BI, this will provide a very familiar environment for you. Today it is just one source, just SQL. We'll talk more about that in an upcoming episode. But that was pretty cool. We announced the public preview of that. We also announced the public preview of the admin analytics. So that was for Power Apps and Flow. I talked about that last week. But I think for this audience, I think something that they'll be interested in is more information around the Azure Logic Apps Integration Service Environment, or ICE, was released. There's actually some documentation now that the Logic Apps team has put out. They also did talk about it in their session. It is recorded. You can go ahead and look for that one. It was on the Monday afternoon. But I think it's sort of interesting. Like Logic Apps sort of was born out of this consumption-based model, which obviously is attractive for many, but I think they also identified some opportunities to provide more of a dedicated model as well. So similar to what we see with Service Bus or Event Hubs, now you have some dedicated capacity that you can actually leverage from a Logic Apps perspective. And I think it is interesting. At first, it's kind of like, well, why would you do that? But the more you think about it, for some organizations, maybe they have a lot of load. This actually might be even more cost effective for them. I think another thing that does happen is budgeting cycles. So some customers today might struggle with how do they forecast their Logic Apps consumption and how do they budget that? Where having like a dedicated model would actually sort of be more predictable from a cost perspective. But I think the most interesting thing for me, or one of the more interesting things for me, was this ability for dedicated or ICE to be able to talk to a VNet. And as soon as you can talk to a VNet, guess what happens?
Yeah, you get it's better performance, I think, than with the little gateway, right?
Yeah, so it's from an on-premise connectivity perspective. Now you're able to tunnel that over your express route, which has quality of service, or potentially your site-to-site VPN as well.
Yeah,
so you've got more sort of throughput. And so John Fancy in his talk did talk about sort of some performance benefits of connecting to SQL on-prem through the VNet versus the on-premise data gateway. Now, he does call out like mileage may vary. This was his test, but he was able to get 4x throughput improvement which is pretty substantial. I think the other thing is with the on-premise gateway today, it's only 2 megs. So, that's another thing where if you have now an express route or site-to-site VPN, you're not going to run into some of those limitations. And when I looked at it, I was curious around like how are they planning to deal with connectors and connectors being able to understand how they should actually route that traffic. So today when you have things like, say, Azure VMs, you've got these user-defined routes, UDRs, where you can choose how you want traffic to be routed. Should it go outside to the internet? Should it get tunneled back into my on-prem and go through my firewalls from that perspective? I was curious how they were going to support this. And in this documentation page, and we should link this up perhaps.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Sure.
Is, so there's different sort of versions of connectors. So here it is, here I'm looking at it. So blob storage, file storage, table storage, queues, service bus, FTP, SSH FTP, SQL Server, AS2, X12, Edifact. Those are all going to have ICE versions of the connector, which allows you then to communicate with your VNets internally without it actually leaving and going to the public internet. So it'll be interesting to see how they were able to scale this out as more and more connectors are onboarded. Other interesting things is that when you talk to, say, an on-premise, say, API, you can actually use HTTP and use this VNet. So you're no longer creating a custom connector and trying to route it through the on-premise data gateway. So I think it's pretty cool. I think it's something to watch for. I think the best thing of all of this is that customers like options, customers get options. You want to use consumption, which is I'm still a big fan of, go ahead and use consumption. You want to use dedicated, maybe it's preventing noisy neighbor, more predictability around your workload performance. Maybe it's around your budgeting process. Like options are good. So I think this is what I'm pretty excited about. And
that has been asked for too, man. Many of the previous conferences or stuff we have at MVP summits. This has been asked for quite a long time, right? To have something more like what you're describing.
Yeah, they announced that they're in private preview at this point. So there's customers actually using this technology, which is neat. And then they had a form out where people could submit to actually become part of the public preview.
And you know when that might be, or is that still?
I'd be guessing. So I would suggest if people are interested, they did tweet about it. Look at the Azure Logic Apps tweets, and you'll find it there. Fill out the form, and they're the best people to work through that.
Right. And there was something also about the SAP connector.
Yeah, so that was cool too. So we saw a little bit of this at Integrate in June. And it was around SAP supporting triggers, or the SAP connector supporting triggers, rather. And so that is now in public preview as well. I believe that's now open to everyone. I'm pretty sure that's the case. And so that's also exciting as well. I guess what's also interesting is currently that is built upon the on-premise data gateway. So I think that would be another great opportunity to support an ICE connector. I'm not 100% sure, but I would imagine they would probably, pivot and support that model as well. Because certainly with SAP, when you have those transactions, they're typically highly valuable. So you want to make sure that you've got sort of the performance and durability around it. So I think that was really interesting to see, and glad to see, having worked a lot with SAP in my previous lives, that's good to see. So I'm happy they were able to ship that.
Awesome.
So now you had some conferences here recently as well, right? So you were at what was it called again?
Technorama. So
I'm new to that one. I haven't heard of that one.
Well, there has been a Technorama in Belgium for quite a substantial amount of years, and they wanted to do this in Holland as a follow-up to the previous Tech Days.
In your backyard?
Yeah, it was in my backyard. And I was one of the speakers, so basically I could just walk up to the venue and do my talk
That's a difference, eh?
Yeah, it's definitely
getting
different.
On a plane?
Yeah. Instead of, talking all around the world, you basically talk in your backyard. And that was a big conference, and it was focused not just predominantly it's focused on devs, but it was not just about code and writing code, but it was also about Kubernetes, this container stuff. We had like Scott Guthrie as a keynote speaker, who was pivoting some of the technologies that were announced at Ignite. But the interesting thing, though, he was talking about some of the key technologies, according to them, also in the serverless type of arena. And in Logic Apps was just right in the middle, next to Service Fabric on one end and Kubernetes on the other end. And that was kind of interesting. The other interesting thing was, too, that there were talks around Power Apps, Flow, and Power BI. So it's not like, only the Microsoft Cloud, Azure Cloud, but also the Microsoft Cloud. So it really broadened the spectrum of what developers could face, because it's not about Visual Studio and code anymore. It's about a lot of stuff. It's about either doing stuff and packaging your application in a container and push it to Kubernetes, or it's more like no-code type of development, or you could say that you build like platform as a service capability.
Right.
At least you leverage that to build up your solution. And maybe you still code some stuff and put it in an app service, but there's other stuff you can leverage from various perspectives and architectures you're going to basically create for your customers.
I think the key point is just around like high productivity application platforms,
Yes.
right? And obviously, like custom code is not going anywhere.
No.
But it's also begs the question of when you need a low code or no code solution, you should probably explore that and understand it, because at the end of the day, it's not about like writing code. It's not the number of lines of code. It's actually the value that you actually produce by your application.
That's actually a good point, because basically Scott Guthrie in the end of in his talk, or in the end of his keynote, basically said it's all about driving value for the customer.
Exactly.
And even in my talk, also pushed out in the end, there's a lot of things going on in Azure. I just toe-tipped some of the technologies or trends that were going on, like in AI and in like operational databases, as Scott Guthrie called them, like the Cosmos DB, serverless, or platform as a service, because there's a thin line. We've talked about this before in another Middleware Friday session. Those are things that are all going on, and that's what you're kind of dealing with as a new age type of developer. It's not about just code, but it's about all these different technologies you're probably going to touch anyway if you're working for customers in Azure projects. So yeah.
And I think the big thing is what's important is just to understand what else exists out there. Like it's sort of knowing what you don't know and knowing what you know, with the idea that when a problem emerges, you know what is the right tool that you actually need to go solve that problem with.
Yep.
And I think when people sort of put on their blinders, that's when they miss out on opportunities, regardless of if it's low code or it's high code. No. But it's really around like, how do you drive value for your customers or for the company you work for? Exactly. And I think that's what's nice about an event like this, where there is a broad spectrum of technology, because it creates awareness.
Yeah,
and I think it allows people to learn and actually develop new skills and drive outcomes for their customers or their company.
I think that was the case with you saying at Ignite, because there was versatile too in topics and speakers and etc. And the same thing on a little bit of a smaller scale locally in my backyard, but the same setup, right? It's not about just one technology, but the whole broad spectrum, going from, like you say, no code to code, Microsoft Cloud, Microsoft Azure. Yeah, it's the whole package. So that's pretty cool.
So what else are you going to do while you're in Phoenix here?
Well,
what's the plan?
That's nice of you to ask. Yeah, I'm kind of here to hang out. Tomorrow we do some golfing. We're going to watch some sports. We're really going to relax and enjoy ourselves. You're going to a conference next week where you speak.
That's true, yeah.
I'm going back home
Power Summits, yeah.
To start working, do some classes about Azure Integration. So yeah, we basically next week is back to work. So, and after doing a marathon, it's cool to hang out here with you in Phoenix. The weather is good, and it's nice to unwind a bit. So yeah, that's all cool.
The weather's always good in Phoenix.
Yeah, it's a great place.
All right.
So, okay, thanks guys. So see you next time.
Fear the fork.
Fear the fork. So I hope you liked the recording. So this is one of the links towards one of the resources pointed out the interview or the talk I did with Kent, from Phoenix. So you can find it right here. So you can look it up. The other thing I'd like to point out, talking about events, is one that will be taking place next year. If you're in Holland, it's called the Azure Lowlands. It will take place the 25th of January 2019. It will also talk about platform as a service, ranging from containers to data, DevOps, integration, IoT, and artificial intelligence. Those are kind of the topics that we touch upon. It will be a one-day event with 2 tracks. Started off with a generic keynote, then there will be 2 tracks, and then there will be a closing keynote. So if you're around, please do try to get some of the tickets. So I'd like to thank you for watching. Shout out to Business 360 for being a good host, and I will leave you with the music credits.